An Awakening, written by Khaled Abu Alada, The Silence Before Velocity. By then, discipline was not something I practiced. Discipline was something I owned. Deadlines did not intimidate me. They answered me. When I spoke, teams aligned, not because I demanded it, but because my clarity made hesitation feel expensive. Proposals moved through my hands like engineered machinery, measured, sequenced, repeatable, clean. From the outside, I look like the kind of man people label high performance and stop questioning. But inside, there was a quiet friction that never showed on paper. It was not chaos. It was not collapse. It was not the obvious kind of suffering that makes other people intervene. It was subtler than that, which made it more dangerous. It was resistance, thin, invisible resistance, like a brake pad lightly kissing the wheel even when you swear your foot is off the pedal. I could feel it in the gap between intention and action, not minutes, not hours, a half second, a small delay that sounds harmless until you understand how high-performance environments work. Half seconds don't stay small. They multiply, they compound, they turn into unfinished drafts, postponed decisions, unnecessary stress, and wasted mental heat. And the cruel part is that nobody sees it because you still deliver. You still look fine. You still perform. That is how drag hides. It lets you succeed while quietly taxing you for every success. I had already fought distraction the hard way. I did not learn focus from a book. I learned it from consequences. Years of failure taught me what divided attention costs. Multitasking didn't fade out of my life. It got burned out of me. Recovery stripped impulsivity down to bone and taught me what happens when you trust every urge that speaks. Engineering trained my mind to think in systems, to reduce problems to components, to design processes instead of improvising survival. So I expected my mind to run clean. Yet something remained. Latency, a mild delay that made starting feel like negotiation instead of command. A low hum of internal bargaining. Small, constant, exhausting. It wasn't dramatic enough to cause suffering, but it was persistent enough to steal sharpness. It was like try to sprint with a weight vest you forgot you were wearing. That was the real frustration. I wasn't weak. I wasn't lost. I wasn't out of control. I was contained, but still capped. And when a man knows he can operate at a higher frequency, being capped feels like living under a ceiling you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot argue with. You just feel it pressing down in the background of every task. That is what made the fictional drug interesting. Not because I was desperate. Desperation has a smell. This wasn't that. This wasn't escape. And it wasn't rebellion dressed up as curiosity. It wasn't the old version of me hunting a chemical exit. I know that road. I have already paid that toll. This was experimentation. The cold kind. Strategic. Measured. Controlled. I approached it the way I approach procurement frameworks and bid strategy. I studied the mechanism, the half-life, the pathways, the abuse potential, the neurochemical profile. I did not want magic. I wanted predictability. I did not want pleasure. I wanted function. It also mattered what it did not promise. It wasn't selling euphoria. It wasn't offering a rush. It wasn't trying to seduce me into fireworks. It promised something quieter, and that quiet promise hit deeper. Wakefulness, cognitive endurance, extended executive clarity. But the real hook was not energy. The real hook was continuity. Because energy can be brute force. Energy can be manic, messy, unstable. Continuity is different. Continuity is calm. Continuity is the ability to remain inside the work without being dragged out by noise, hunger, doubt, or the cheap dopamine reflex of checking a screen. I didn't want to be faster. I wanted to be uninterrupted. The first morning confirmed something important. There was no drama, no lightning, no surge, no cinematic transformation, no moment where the world sharpened and the soundtrack swelled. It came in like a thief, not stealing something from me, but stealing the part of me that always resisted. Time passed, and then something subtle snapped into place. The internal negotiation disappeared. The micro-arguments that used to live under every task. Start now / start later. Focus / wander. Commit / delay. Went silent. The background noise that taxes willpower didn't fight me. It simply lowered itself, like someone turning down a radio I didn't realize was playing. I opened a document I had been postponing. Usually, I would circle like a predator with hesitation, skim a few lines, switch tabs, and just formatting, rethink structure, pretend I was preparing to do the work. That's what delay looks like when it wants to wear a suit and call itself professionalism. This time, I entered the document fully, not with effort, with presence. The text did not resist me. Ideas arranged themselves without force. Paragraphs connected naturally. The architecture of thought felt continuous, not faster, not louder, not inflated, just clean, like the friction was gone and the engine could finally do what it was built to do. What surprised me most was emotional neutrality. There was no rush, no urgency, no artificial motivation, no fake confidence, just steady cognitive presence, like my mind was standing straight without needing to tense. Time didn't speed up or slow down. It stabilized. Hours later, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once. Not because I fought the impulse, not because I performed discipline, because the impulse never arrived. That was new. That was dangerous. That was beautiful. For a man who rebuilt himself on discipline, this felt unfamiliar. Discipline is repetition of effort. Discipline is pushing. Discipline is you winning a fight. You keep having a fight. This was not a fight. This was alignment. By evening, I ran a quiet diagnostic the way I always do when something changes. Heart rate stable, mood neutral, no irritability, no ego spike, no reckless confidence. Sleep still felt intact, still expected, still respected. No crash, no ugly drop, just clarity tapering gently, like a light dimming rather than cutting out. That night, I wrote one line in my private notebook, and I wrote it carefully because I knew it was a blade with two edges. This doesn't make me stronger. It removes resistance. That distinction mattered more than any productivity metric, because this was not about becoming superhuman. It was about seeing what my baseline actually looked like when distraction, fatigue, and cognitive drag were minimized, when the hidden weight vest is unbuckled, and the body remembered what unweighted movement feels like. And that is the first real danger of any advantage. Once you experience silence inside your own mind, you start noticing how loud normal is. Once you experience frictionless execution, you start seeing how much of your life has been spent negotiating with yourself. That morning wasn't a turning point. It was calibration. It wasn't the awakening. It was the first time the awakening looked at me and said, quietly, this is what you are capable of when nothing is pulling you apart. It was a kind that reveals fatigue fast, the kind that makes your mind show its cracks even when your face stays calm. There were executive obligations that demanded clean judgment, bid timelines that punish hesitation, client reviews that require precision without ego, and internal restructuring that pulled attention in too many directions at once. That kind of environment does not care about intention. It cares about output coherence and consistency. Before, I survived that workload by compressing effort like a man packing explosives into a smaller container. I ran deep sprints, burned hot, then collapsed into control recovery like it was part of the architecture. I called it discipline, and in many ways but it was also a kind of negotiated exhaustion. I was managing strain, not eliminating it. This week, something different emerged. It was not intensity. It was endurance. The fictional drug did not push me into that manic, hungry productivity that looks impressive and ends ugly. It did something quieter and more dangerous. It removed the decline. That distinction matters. Hyperproductivity is obvious. You can see it. You can feel it. It carries heat. This did not carry heat. This carried stability. By the fifth hour, my thinking still held the same clarity it had at the first hour. That had never been normal for me. Normally, by midday, erosion begins in small humiliations that nobody else notices, but I always do. The mind starts scattering. The eyes return to the same line twice. The tabs multiply. The rereading increases. The synthesis slows down. A thin emotional fatigue appears. Not dramatic enough to cause stress, but strong enough to dull precision. This time, none of that happened. The curve stayed flat. My cognition felt stable in a way that reminded me of machinery operating inside safe limits. No overheating, no vibration, no hidden strain. It was not louder. It was not faster. It was simply consistent. And consistency is the rarest currency in high-pressure work because most people can produce brilliance in bursts. Almost nobody can produce clarity without decay. But the real shift was not output. The real shift was decision quality. Strategic work is not a single layer. It is stacked complexity. It demands technical accuracy without blindness, financial logic without cowardice, political awareness without cynicism, and psychological precision without manipulation. You are not just building a proposal. You are predicting human behavior and aligning it with constraints. In one bid review, I noticed something unfamiliar and slightly unsettling. I could hold multiple strategic variables in my mind at the same time without strain. Compliance risk stayed visible, while competitor positioning stayed mapped. Client political climate remained in view, while financial buffers remained calculated. Narrative persuasion did not become an afterthought. It sat beside the numbers like an equal. Usually, my mind would process those variables in sequence, one after the other, like a man carrying heavy boxes upstairs. This time, the variables felt integrated, like a single system moving together. It was not multitasking. Multitasking is fragmentation dressed up as competence. This was integrated thinking. Sustained focus that could handle complexity without breaking into pieces. That mattered to me because I have written about divided attention and watched it ruin people who thought they were immune. This was different. This was not distraction managed through force. This was distraction reduced at the source. There was also emotional steadiness, and this part deserves respect because it is where arrogance begins. Under pressure, I did not become sharp-tongued. During revisions, I did not spike into frustration. With slower team members, I did not leak impatience through tone or timing. Authority stayed calm. Patience did not feel manufactured. It felt present, as if it lived in me without being demanded. That kind of steadiness is powerful, but power is not automatically good. Power without humility turns into cruelty disguised as efficiency. I watched myself carefully. Sleep remained intact, which surprised me more than the clarity. I expected disruption. I expected delayed onset or fractured nights. But the nights were clean, almost silent. They did not feel sedated. They felt natural, like the brain had worked efficiently instead of thrashing and overheating. There is a difference between being knocked out and being finished. This felt like being finished. Then week 2 introduced a question that hit harder than any side effect could. Was this enhancement or restoration? That question disturbed me because of what it implied. If this was enhancement, I could frame it as an advantage I chose to apply. If this was restoration, then it meant I had been living below capacity for years without fully realizing it. It meant my discipline had been compensating for hidden drag. It meant I had built an identity around effort that might have been partly unnecessary. That kind of realization does not flatter you. It exposes you. I did not increase dosage. I did not chase more. I did not negotiate with the success and call it ambition. That was critical because I know myself. I know the old architecture of my mind. I know how quickly useful becomes often, and how quickly often becomes normal, and how quickly normal becomes needed. Discipline was not a performance trait for me. Discipline was a wall between my present and my past. So I tracked like an operator, not like a believer. I tracked duration. I tracked mood variability. I tracked sleep depth. I tracked appetite shifts. I tracked cognitive sharpness as it tapered. I watched for spikes, crashes, irritability, confidence inflation, and the most dangerous signal of all, the impulse to escalate. There was no escalation impulse. That last detail mattered. It reassured me. The experience did not whisper more the way my past had whispered more. It did not seduce. It did not bargain. It did not threaten. It simply said quietly, continue. One afternoon, I reviewed a 60-page proposal in one sitting. No breaks. No pacing tricks. No bargaining with myself. No mental stalling disguised as strategic thinking. I stayed inside the work until the work was complete. When I stood up, I realized something subtle and profound. I was not drained. I was complete. Drain feels like depletion, like you tore something out of yourself to deliver. Completion feels like resolution, like the system finished its cycle without tearing. For years, productivity had felt like extraction, like I was mining my own nervous system for output. This time, it felt like alignment, like the work passed through me without scraping the inside. That is where caution entered, because every system has a cost, even if the invoice arrives late. I started asking questions that were less about performance and more about identity. If resistance is removed, what else disappears with it? If fatigue teaches limits, what happens when fatigue becomes quiet? If struggle builds resilience, what happens when struggle becomes optional? If friction sharpens discipline, what happens when friction no longer forces sharpening? Who do I become when the thing that shaped me, resistance, no longer presses against me? The awakening stopped being about clarity. It became about self-perception. Because when you remove resistance from a man who rebuilt himself through resistance, you do not just change his productivity. You change the architecture of how he understands his own strength. And at that stage, I was not yet sure whether I was watching evolution or dependency wearing a clean suit, the edge of control. The third week did not bring chaos. The third week brought something cleaner than chaos, and that is why it felt more dangerous. Chaos is loud, and loud problems get noticed. Precision is quiet, and quiet power grows without witnesses. Nothing arrived as a side effect. Nothing arrived as a warning. What arrived was precision, the kind that feels like a blade that never shakes. The fictional drug did not make me sharper in a noisy, aggressive way. It did not turn me into a frantic worker or a manic performer who needs applause to keep moving. It did something more subtle. It removed hesitation. When hesitation disappeared, I understood something that should have been obvious years earlier. Hesitation had never been weakness inside my system. Hesitation had been a governor, a built-in brake that kept me careful, moral, and slightly afraid of consequence. Before, I made decisions with weight. I calculated and measured because I knew decisions do not end when you make them. Decisions echo. Decisions multiply. Decisions become second and third order consequences that return later and collect interest. Even when I felt confident, I still carried a micropause inside me, and that micropause was not indecision. It was an internal checkpoint. It was a silent question that keeps a man from turning certainty into arrogance. Are you sure? That checkpoint protected me from myself more than it protected me from the world. Then the checkpoint went quiet. Now decisions flowed without the pause, and the flow was not reckless. The flow was not impulsive. The flow was not careless. The flow was simply clean, like a well-designed system running without friction. I would read a clause in a contract, and the conclusion would land instantly, as if my mind had already finished the analysis before my eyes finished the sentence. I would recognize risk without drama. I would see manipulation without anger. I would detect weakness in language without needing to argue with it. The verdict would appear whole. Reject, revise, accept with conditions. No loop would start. No debate would bloom. No internal negotiation would chew time. The answer would surface complete, like it had been waiting behind the page. Efficiency like that feels powerful because it changes your posture inside your own mind. Power is not always excitement. Power is sometimes a sudden absence of effort. And the absence of effort can feel like destiny if you are not careful. At first, power does not announce itself. It does not shout. It does not ask permission. It reveals itself in silence, and silence is where the ego starts building a throne. In a high-stakes review meeting, I watch people process out loud the way they always do when a room carries weight. They debated to buy time. They hesitated to avoid responsibility. They circled difficult points because landing on a decision means owning the outcome. They tried to manufacture certainty through conversation, like certainty can be produced by noise. While they were still speaking, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. I was already 3 moves ahead, not because I was smarter, Not because I was special. I was ahead because my mind was not buffering. There was no delay between input and synthesis. Information landed and immediately organized itself into structure, as if my brain had stopped arguing with itself and started behaving like a machine that finally found optimal alignment. The clarity felt surgical. Surgery is not emotional. Surgery is not dramatic. Surgery is quiet, controlled, and exact. For a man who built identity on discipline and preparation, that level of exactness felt like acceleration beyond effort. It felt like a reward for years of grinding. Except rewards are dangerous when they arrive too clean, because clean rewards teach the mind to believe it deserves more. Acceleration also changes perception, and perception is where danger begins. When your internal speed increases, other people start appearing slower. They do not appear stupid, and they do not appear incompetent. They just appear delayed. That seems harmless until you notice what it produces inside you. Irritation that feels reasonable, impatience that feels justified, and a silent contempt that starts whispering. Why is this taking them so long? That whisper is not leadership. That whisper is the first draft of arrogance. I had to slow my tone consciously. I had to let people arrive at conclusions I had already reached minutes earlier, and that felt unnatural because fast minds confuse speed with truth. But leadership is not about arriving first. Leadership is about arriving together. When you reach the answer alone, you are not leading. You are separating. Separation looks like superiority, and superiority eventually becomes loneliness. Even when surrounded by people, the fictional drug did not erase empathy, but it reduced my tolerance for inefficiency. That frightened me more than any physical symptom could have, because I know what happens when performance starts outrunning humility. I have seen men turn sharp, then turn cruel, then call it standards. I have seen speed become superiority in disguise, and superiority is a drug of its own. Another change appeared, subtle but heavy. Fear reduced. Fear did not vanish, and that distinction mattered. Fear is not an enemy. Fear is a sensor, a warning system that keeps a man from believing his own myth. Fear reminds you that outcomes have teeth. That week, the pre-presentation anxiety dropped. The background pressure of public speaking softened. The mind stopped catastrophizing and started evaluating. It felt like my brain replaced horror stories with risk models. One afternoon, I stood in front of executives and felt something unfamiliar. Composure without effort. It was not the trained composure of a man suppressing nerves while pretending he is calm. It was actual calm. It lived in my chest like still water. It did not require performance. It did not require armor. It simply existed. The difference was not cosmetic. The difference was spiritual. Suppressed fear is a fight you win repeatedly. Reduced fear is silence you inherit. And inherited silence can be dangerous because it can make you forget what fear was protecting you from. That silence forced a harder question. If fear decreases, does caution decrease with it? Fear protects attention. Fear preserves humility. Fear keeps a man from stepping too far forward without checking the ground. When fear softens, wisdom must become deliberate. Confidence is not maturity. Confidence can be the absence of alarms. And alarms sometimes exist for a reason. So I built a counterweight that could not be negotiated with. I required written validation for major decisions during that period. Clarity can lie when it feels perfect. Overconfidence does not arrive wearing ego. Overconfidence arrives wearing logic. Physically, everything remained stable. Sleep stayed intact. Appetite stayed normal. Mood stayed even. No irritability appeared. No crash came. No visible penalty showed up to scare me. That stability made the entire experience more deceptive. When nothing feels wrong, vigilance declines. When a tool produces clean results without immediate cost, the mind starts granting it trust too easily. Blind trust is how dependency grows in a man who thinks discipline makes him immune. By the end of the third week, something became undeniable. The fictional drug did not give me something foreign. It amplified what was already present. Executive control, sustained attention, cognitive endurance. It felt less like adding horsepower and more like removing internal drag, as if my natural system had been running with friction for years, and someone quietly loosened bolts I did not know were tight. But I noticed something else. and that detail mattered more than success. When I skipped a day, the contrast was visible. The contrast was not dramatic. The contrast was not catastrophic. The contrast was just real. Starting felt heavier. Negotiation returned. Willpower cost became noticeable again. The work still happened, but ignition was no longer automatic. That is where the awakening shifted from improvement to risk awareness. Not addiction, not craving, not a voice screaming more. Just preference. Preference is how patterns begin. Preference is how the mind starts rewriting baseline as deficiency. Preference is how the tool starts moving from optional into expected. And once expected, it becomes a quiet standard you measure yourself against. The real edge of control is not whether something improves you. That question is cheap because many things improve you in the short term and ruin you in the long term. The real question is harsher and more honest. Can you walk away from improvement without feeling diminished? I had not tested that yet, but I knew it would be the decisive test. Mastery is not proven by what you can use. Mastery is proven by what you can refuse. Restraint is the final proof, and I intended to prove it. Because if I could not, then the precision was not power. It was a leash that happened to feel like freedom, velocity, and identity. After the pause, KX brought the fictional drug back with rules that did not bend. KX did not take the fictional drug out of habit, and KX did not take the fictional drug to feel better. KX took the fictional drug only when the day carried a specific kind of pressure. Pressure that demanded long stretches of executive clarity. Pressure that required sustained synthesis across competing interests, and pressure that punished any drop in precision. KX rejected routine because routine dulls awareness. Routine makes a powerful choice feel ordinary. Ordinary choices stop being choices. Ordinary choices become default behavior, and default behavior becomes a quiet owner. The workload grew sharper. More bids arrived with more political complexity attached. Higher value projects created higher stakes meetings, and higher stakes meetings created smaller margins for error. CTO responsibilities expanded across more people, more timelines, and more conflict between what leaders wanted and what systems could actually deliver. Advisory work demanded fast transitions between contexts that normally leave residue behind. Earlier versions of KX would have responded by rationing energy with strict scheduling, and earlier versions of KX would have treated recovery like an emergency reserve. Earlier versions of KX would have accepted cognitive erosion as a normal tax and would have paid the tax silently. That method worked, but the method always extracted a hidden price. Decision quality would decay late in the day, and decay would arrive quietly enough to hide behind professionalism. Under the new operating method, KX noticed a different pattern. Strategic depth stayed available across multiple environments without noticeable decline. The mind did not splinter after switching contexts. The mind did not drag unfinished threads into the next conversation. The mind closed one category of thinking and opened the next category of thinking with clean separation. That clean separation felt unfamiliar because clean separation is rare under real pressure. 1 week became a private reference point. KX handled 3 major proposals that demanded technical accuracy and narrative discipline at the same time. KX delivered 2 executive briefings that required authority without theatrics. KX completed 1 long architectural overhaul session that required holding many constraints simultaneously without letting any constraint fall out of view. Under normal baseline operations, that week would have required a recovery period, not because KX was weak, but because mental output always creates mental cost. During that week, KX remained internally steady. Emotional carryover did not leak into the next task. Cognitive residue did not cling to the next meeting. When KX ended a task, the task ended. That kind of velocity brings a quiet danger that fatigue does not. Fatigue is visible and therefore manageable. Velocity is flattering and therefore corrupting. People notice a shift, and people translated the shift into identity. Colleagues began framing performance as a permanent upgrade instead of a temporary state. Praise arrived in short sentences that carried hidden hooks. People said, KX became sharper. People said, KX became different. People said, KX reached another level. Compliments like that feel harmless until compliments start teaching a person to confuse a state with a self. Performance states fluctuate. Any identity tied to a fluctuating state becomes unstable. KX refused that identity trap. KX defined the self as disciplined awareness, not peak output. Disciplined awareness survives high clarity and survives average clarity without collapsing into shame or arrogance. Time also changed shape in KX's perception. Earlier, deadlines would make hours feel aggressive, and earlier, the day would feel like a chase. Under the new state, long work blocks stopped feeling like theft. KX stayed inside the work without constantly checking time. KX did not keep measuring how long the effort would last. Stress reduced, not because the workload became lighter, but because internal resistance became quieter. The workload remained heavy. The friction became lighter. That difference altered the entire experience of pressure. Then a seductive thought began speaking with calm logic. If KX can operate at that level, why would KX ever choose baseline? That question is not loud. That question sounds practical. That question sounds ambitious. That question sounds like a rational upgrade path. But the question carries a trap. The question turns assistance into entitlement, and entitlement becomes dependency wearing professional mask. KX built boundaries before temptation could negotiate. KX banned the fictional drug from weekends because weekends are where patterns harden. KX banned the fictional drug from small tasks because small tasks do not justify artificial leverage. KX banned the fictional drug from days with poor sleep because poor sleep is a warning that needs correction, not concealment. KX banned the fictional drug from emotional discomfort because emotional discomfort contains information and needs to be processed, not muted. Those rules kept the fictional drug as an instrument rather than a lifestyle. Another truth became clear through repeated exposure. The fictional drug did not generate raw ideas. The fictional drug did not create imagination. The fictional drug made execution cleaner once the idea already existed. KX still needed quiet space for idea creation. KX still needed reflection for new connections. KX still needed silence for meaning. The fictional drug improved refinement, not invention. That mattered because KX would never allow endurance support to become imagination replacement. During one late systems review, KX stopped not from fatigue, but from recognition. The period felt like controlled acceleration, and acceleration always magnifies direction. Aligned direction becomes progress under acceleration. The distorted direction collapses under acceleration. The fictional drug did not correct direction. The fictional drug increased force along a direction. That recognition carried both relief and warning. The foundation built through recovery made direction stable. Impulse control stayed intact. Value stayed intact. Self-trust stayed intact. Without that foundation, the same tool would have carried a higher risk because speed amplifies whatever already exists inside the operator. At that stage, the awakening shifted again. The awakening stopped being about clarity and became about responsibility. A cleaner mind creates a harder moral requirement. A sharper mind can cut through complexity, but a sharper mind can also cut through humility if the operator stops watching. KX faced the central choice directly. KX could use the tool to deepen character through disciplined governance. KX could use the tool to inflate ego through quiet superiority. The line between those outcomes is thin and easy to cross without noticing. KX chose conscious governance because conscious governance is the only safe form of power. KX closed the chapter with a sentence that carried no drama and no self-congratulation. Velocity stays neutral. Direction decides outcome. The quiet danger. The month brought a problem that never shows up as a crisis. The month brought normalization. At the beginning, the fictional drug had a boundary around it. The fictional drug felt like an operation, a contained event with rules, observation, and caution. Later, the fictional drug started feeling like part of the environment. The fictional drug stopped feeling like something KX used and started feeling like something KX could reach for without thinking. That shift mattered more than any physical symptom, because danger rarely begins with harm. Danger begins with familiarity. In the early stage, KX treated every dose like a reportable incident. KX measured outcomes, tracked behavior, watched the mind for distortions, and treated discipline like a security system. Later, the discipline guard loosened. KX no longer felt the need to check heart rate or scan for mood changes. No visible cost appeared, and the absence of visible cost produced a quiet comfort. Comfort is not evil, but comfort is deceptive. Comfort does not announce dependence. Comfort turns a sharp watch into a soft gaze. One morning, before a strategic review that carried executive weight, KX paused. Sleep had been clean. Mental clarity felt normal. Workload was heavy but manageable. Nothing demanded assistance. Still, the thought arrived, take the fictional drug. The thought did not arrive as desperation. The thought arrived as a preference. That moment mattered because preference does not feel like craving. Preference feels civilized. The preference feels reasonable. Preference speaks the language of performance. Operate at the best level available. Preference does not sound like a problem. Preference sounds like a standard. KX refused a fictional drug that morning and watched the day with strict honesty. The meeting went well. Baseline clarity stayed intact. The work was handled. The strategy held. But KX noticed a difference that did not show on outcomes. KX noticed effort. The effort was not strain. The effort was not suffering. The effort was simply work that required conscious maintenance. Complex discussion demanded deliberate order. Linear reasoning required active control. Attention required supervision. Without the fictional drug, stamina behaved like something that needed management. With the fictional drug, stamina behaved like something that arrived automatically. The contrast was undeniable, and contrast is where risk hides. Risk does not hide in failure. Risk hides in a moment when baseline becomes acceptable and enhancement becomes preferred. A quiet psychological distortion starts there. When an elevated state becomes an internal reference point, baseline begins feeling like decline. Baseline does not decline in reality. Baseline declines only in comparison, and comparison can poison gratitude. KX refused that shift because resentment toward baseline is not ambition. Resentment toward baseline is the beginning of self-contempt disguised as standards. KX made a rule in the mind that did not bend. Baseline must remain respected. If baseline starts feeling inferior, then the fictional drug has already taken something important. The fictional drug would not have increased productivity. The fictional drug would have taken self-acceptance. Another observation surfaced, and the observation carried a deeper threat than fatigue. The fictional drug slightly smoothed emotional edges. The smoothing was not numbness. The smoothing was not suppression. The smoothing was a reduction in intensity. Pressure did not spike as sharply. Criticism did not linger as long. Delays did not irritate as quickly. At first, the effect looked like maturity because emotional stability is often mistaken for emotional strength. KX forced a harder question into the light. Was emotional smoothing regulation, or was emotional smoothing dampening? That difference matters because emotion is not only reaction. Emotion is information. Anxiety warns. Frustration signals misalignment. Excitement marks meaning. Disgust marks a violation. If emotional edges flatten too much, microsignals disappear, and microsignals often carry the earliest truth. KX began watching emotional cues with suspicion and respect. Because trading volatility for dullness is not growth. Trading volatility for dullness is a slow loss of depth. Then a moment arrived inside a team. A small conflict surfaced. The kind of conflict that normally produces internal activation. In earlier periods, tension would create a tightening inside the chest and a sense of urgency to address the issue quickly, not control people, but to protect cohesion. During that moment, KX felt calm. The calm felt excessive. KX resolved the conflict efficiently. KX chose the correct words. KX protected the structure. The outcome was clean. Later, alone, KX asked a question that efficiency avoids. Did KX feel the human weight of the conflict, or did KX only see the structural solution? Leadership is not only about decision-making. Leadership is emotional presence. Leadership includes the ability to feel what a team carries, not only the ability to fix what a team breaks. If cognitive efficiency starts replacing emotional depth, then evolution has not occurred. An imbalance has occurred. Reduced usage further, not from fear, but from recalibration. KX limited the fictional drug to 2 days per week at most. KX allowed usage only inside strategic windows with a clear purpose. KX avoided consecutive usage days. KX wanted contrast because contrast keeps perception honest. Contrast prevents the elevated state from becoming invisible. Invisible elevation becomes entitlement. Entitlement becomes identity drift. A paradox exists inside high performance. Increased efficiency makes costs harder to detect. Smooth execution creates the illusion of self-power. The illusion seduces the operator into believing the system runs on pure will. The system does not run on pure will. The system runs on support, and support must remain visible. It becomes ownership. Near the end of the month, KX wrote a sentence with no drama, because drama is not required for truth. The danger is not addiction. The danger is identity drift. If KX begins seeing the enhanced version of KX as the real version of KX, then the baseline becomes shame. If baseline becomes shame, then chemistry begins owning self-concept. KX refused that outcome a level of seriousness that did not need performance. KX would not surrender identity to a substance. KX would not surrender identity to any shortcut. Not again, not in any form. The awakening stopped being about performance. The awakening became about preservation. KX focused on preserving humanity inside efficiency. KX focused on preserving humility with clarity. KX focused on preserving agency within assistance. Power that integrates quietly can erode quietly. Quiet erosion is the hardest erosion to detect because everything still looks stable. The calendar still fills. The work still ships. The reputation still grows. The decline happens somewhere deeper, where self-respect and emotional truth live. That is why the month felt dangerous. Not because the fictional drug failed, because the fictional drug succeeded without demanding attention. The illusion of limitlessness. Every ascent contains a quiet trap. The trap arrives at the moment when questioning stops. The trap arrives when competence feels familiar and caution starts feeling unnecessary. During that period, the fictional drug had become controlled and predictable. The fictional drug no longer felt risky, and the fictional drug no longer felt experimental. The fictional drug produced stable performance without chaos, without collapse, and without emotional fallout. Stability created confidence, and confidence created the most dangerous illusion a disciplined person can carry. The illusion said one sentence with a calm voice. KX mastered the system. The sentence did not sound like arrogance. The sentence sounded like competence. The sentence sounded like earned authority. The sentence sounded like the result of discipline finally paying dividends. That is why the illusion was dangerous. Dangerous illusions do not arrive as madness. Dangerous illusions arrive as logic that feels clean. KX could hold long strategic windows without visible cognitive decay. KX could draft, revise, present, and negotiate within one continuous stretch of execution. KX could think in layered structures for hours without fatigue interrupting the internal architecture. The change was not speedy. The change was continuity. Continuity creates a quiet psychological shift because continuity tempts a mind into believing capacity has permanently expanded. 1 week, KX compressed 3 heavy days into a tight sequence. KX ran an executive session that required political accuracy and controlled tone. KX performed a bid architecture overhaul that demanded technical coherence, narrative control, and stakeholder alignment. KX executed financial risk modeling that required detailed discipline and forward forecasting. Under normal baseline conditions, KX would have spaced those demands across a longer timeline to protect recovery and maintain decision quality. During that week, KX compressed the workload into fewer days and succeeded without panic. The success did not arrive as survival. The success arrived as elegance. Elegant success planted a seed that sounded almost responsible. Maybe the old limits were exaggerated. Maybe the old limits were habits. Maybe the old limits were unnecessary caution. That thought is seductive because it reframes restraint as weakness. If limits are optional, rest starts looking like wasted time. Restraint starts looking like fear. Discipline starts becoming less about wisdom and more about domination. Limits are rarely illusions. Limits are feedback systems. Feedback ignored does not disappear. Feedback ignored becomes a consequence with a delayed delivery date, a subtle pattern that appeared inside scheduling. Enhanced days required less obvious recovery, and reduced recovery requirements encouraged denser planning. Denser planning reduced rest windows. Reduced rest windows increased cumulative load. The fictional drug did not demand more from KX. KX demanded more from KX because endurance made demand feel possible. That distinction is critical. Enhancement rarely forces ambition. Enhancement amplifies ambition already present. Amplified ambition becomes a clean reason to fill every empty space. And filled space becomes a quiet form of self-harm when the body is not consulted. A psychological expansion also unfolded. Confidence rose, but the confidence did not resemble arrogance. Confidence resembled certainty. When KX spoke, KX did not second-guess phrasing. When KX decided, KX did not revisit outcomes. When KX planned, contingencies appeared quickly, almost automatically. KX moved through meetings with a calm internal certainty that made decision-making feel effortless. That certainty is useful, but certainty carries a hidden social poison. Certainty can feel like superiority even when intention remains clean. Certainty can cause tone to harden. Certainty can cause patience to shrink. Certainty can cause other people to feel slow without any direct insult being spoken. KX had to repeat a private reminder. Clarity is a state, not an identity. A state comes and goes. Identity remains. Confusing a state with identity creates fragility. During a late evening review session, the mind remained sharp while the body began sending warnings. Eyes dried, neck tightened, posture collapsed into fatigue. The mind stayed alert, and the body started protesting. That split disturbed KX because the split revealed a new capability: override biology. The fictional drug enhances wakefulness. Wakefulness is not restoration. Wakefulness can mask fatigue signals while physical load continues accumulating. The body does not stop paying bills because the mind chooses not to read invoices. The moment KX recognized the ability to override biological pacing, a darker understanding arrived. Override is not freedom. Override is leverage. Leverage must be governed. Leverage without governance becomes self-destruction with clean paperwork. Another layer appeared inside emotional life. Emotional stability remained intact, but joy softened. Joy did not disappear. Joy became less intense. High points became smoother. Low points became less sharp. Life started feeling optimized. Optimization sounds good until optimization begins removing texture. KX began asking questions that performance does not reward but wisdom demands. Does struggle contain value beyond suffering? Does fatigue contain meaning beyond inconvenience? Does relief after strain carry a depth that smooth consistency cannot replicate? When peaks flatten and valleys shallow, does life become efficient but muted? A muted life can look successful and still feel dead. KX reduced usage again, not because damage was visible, but because awareness became sharper. The illusion of limitlessness does not shout recklessness. The illusion of limitlessness whispers inevitability. The illusion says, KX can handle more. The illusion says, KX does not need rest. The illusion says, KX evolved beyond baseline. No one evolves beyond biology. Biology can be supported. Biology can be respected. Biology can be optimized within limits. Biology cannot be transcended. At the end of that period, KX wrote a sentence that refused fantasy while acknowledging improvement. Capacity increased. Limits still exist. The awakening matured, and the question changed. The question stopped being whether the fictional drug helped. The fictional drug helped. The question became harder and more personal. Can KX accept benefit without adopting the belief that KX is beyond human constraint? Every collapse in KX's history began with a specific lie. The lie was not weakness. The lie was not failure. The lie was belief. KX could handle more than KX should. The illusion of limitlessness is that lie wearing a clean suit, the recalibration. December did not bring relief to the calendar. The calendar stayed brutal. Work stayed dense. Deadlines stayed sharp. Responsibilities kept multiplying in the background like numbers on a screen that never stops counting. The external world remained loud. Inside, KX made a different decision. KX did not slow output. KX slowed access. KX slowed the reach toward the fictional drug. Because speed without restraint had started acting like a quiet threat. After the period where endurance began feeling endless, KX initiated a 2-week pause with no loopholes. KX refused strategic exceptions. KX refused last-minute bargaining. KX refused a familiar trick of calling design necessity just because results had been good. The pause was not emotional. The pause was disciplined. The pause was a test designed to answer one question under pressure. What does baseline look like when baseline is not protected by comfort? KX did not want baseline on an easy week. Baseline under ease proves nothing. Baseline under demand reveals the truth. The first days delivered the truth quickly. Fatigue returned in cycles, not as collapse, not as panic, not as failure. Fatigue arrived as predictable weight that rose during late afternoons. Attention drift appeared after long reviews. The mind required intentional resets instead of pretending that endurance was infinite. KX needed breaks that were real breaks, not distractions disguised as breaks. Another return arrived with the fatigue, and the return mattered more than performance metrics. Emotional range deepened. Music did not sound like background. Music felt sharp again, like sound at edges. Frustration did not blur into numbness. Frustration arrived with clarity, as a clean signal instead of messy agitation. Satisfaction regained weight. Completion felt earned rather than engineered. KX recognized a difficult truth. The fictional drug had optimized cognition, but the fictional drug had reduced contrast. Human experience is not built only for efficiency. Human experience is built for texture. Texture comes from contrast. Contrast comes from effort, relief, irritation, patience, fatigue, recovery, and the small waves that remind a person that life is not a straight line. By the end of the first week, the body began adjusting. Sleep deepened. Dreams returned with intensity and detail. Morning clarity felt natural instead of forced, as if the brain had stopped running on borrowed quiet and started generating quiet internally. The surprise was not the sleep. The surprise was a performance. Performance did not collapse. Performance adapted. KX changed structure instead of chasing the old rhythm. KX segmented work into tighter blocks. KX inserted deliberate pauses that did not depend on exhaustion as a trigger. KX added short walks between long reasoning sessions, not for inspiration, but to reset the nervous system. Baseline demanded pacing, and pacing demanded planning. Enhancement had hidden the need for pacing by making stamina feel automatic. Without the fictional drug, KX became more intentional, and that intention created a stronger kind of competence than raw endurance ever could. A quieter lesson formed during that period. Humility returned, not as weakness, but as realism. Without chemical support, biological ceilings became impossible to ignore. When fatigue appeared, KX stopped. KX did not stop because failure arrived. KX stopped because wisdom spoke. Earlier versions of KX would have overridden fatigue out of pride. A chemically supported version of KX could override fatigue out of capability. The awakened version of KX chose not to override fatigue out of maturity. That decision separated growth from performance. Midway through the pause, a foundational truth became undeniable. The fictional drug had never created discipline inside KX. The fictional drug had amplified discipline already present. Discipline remained internal. Discipline remained owned. That realization restored balance because the source matters. If discipline is internal, then assistance cannot claim ownership. Assistance can help execution, but assistance cannot rewrite identity unless KX allows permission. The pause also opened another door. Creativity shifted shape. Creativity did not appear as faster output. Creativity appeared as raw ideation and wider association. Unrelated systems began connecting in unexpected ways. Narrative structures formed through wandering rather than through direct building. Strategic imagination expanded because the mind was not locked into clean execution mode. Under enhancement, Ideas tended to become products quickly, under baseline. Ideas stayed fluid longer, collided with other ideas, and evolved into shapes that execution mode would not naturally allow. Both states carried value, but the states served different functions. KX began treating the fictional drug as a deliberate switch rather than a permanent upgrade. One mode supports exploration. One mode supports completion. Confusing the modes flattens both. After 2 weeks, KX did not feel slower. KX felt grounded. Grounding carries power because grounding prevents drift. Grounding prevents the mind from believing speed equals truth. Grounding prevents the body from being treated like a vehicle that exists only to carry the mind. Acceleration without grounding creates instability, even when the results look impressive. KX reintroduced a fictional drug once before a major strategic presentation, and the contrast arrived immediately. Clarity intensified. Linear thinking returned. Execution tightened. The difference was not the effect. The difference was the relationship. The fictional drug no longer felt superior. The fictional drug felt specific. The fictional drug felt like a tool chosen for a defined task, not a state that deserved permanence. The shift mattered because permanence is where tools become identity, and identity is where danger lives. KX wrote 2 sentences in a notebook, and the sentences carried a clean boundary. I do not need it. I can use it. The first exposure hurt. KX had been living below full capacity for years. Laziness was not the cause. Discipline failure was not the cause. Accumulated cognitive fatigue was the cause. Stress piled up. Responsibility piled up. Vigilance piled up. The mind carried too many invisible debts for too long. The fictional drug did not install a new mind. The fictional drug temporarily lifted the weight of accumulated drag. The drag was not a weakness. The drag was history. The second exposure humbled KX. Identity had been built around visible effort. KX had become the person who rebuilds, the person who outworks, the person who survives through grind. When friction thinned, KX felt lighter and also felt strangely displaced. A hard question surfaced. If struggle shaped the story, who is KX without visible struggle? Many people cling to hardship because hardship validates a narrative. Growth requires releasing attachment to suffering. Strength can exist quietly. The fictional drug forced KX to accept quiet strength without feeling like a fraud. The third exposure protected KX. Restraint proved real. Escalation did not appear. Compulsive reliance did not appear. Emotional collapse during pauses did not appear. The old destructive patterns did not take the wheel again. The earlier version of KX chased extremes and paid for extremes. The current version of KX tested limits and stepped back. That difference was evolution. A subtler exposure involved fear. Assisted days reduce internal noise. Reduce internal noise revealed a truth about anxiety. Much tension was not fear of inability. Much tension was mental overprocessing, endless loops, endless review, endless unnecessary rehearsal. The fictional drug did not erase fear. The fictional drug reduced rumination. The distinction changed self-understanding. The mind might not be anxious by nature. The mind might be overloaded by habit. A major confirmation arrived through a natural state day under extreme workload. Pressure was intense, timelines were tight, and expectation was heavy. KX used no enhancement. KX still performed effectively. The performance required effort, and the effort felt honest. Satisfaction arrived afterward for a private reason. The fictional drug helped, but dependence never formed. Awakening carries a common misunderstanding. Awakening is not a new power. Awakening is recognition of existing power. The fictional drug allowed a glimpse of cognition without drag. A glimpse cannot be unseen. A glimpse also does not require permanent repetition. Possibility becomes knowledge, and knowledge changes behavior. Behavior changed in ways unrelated to chemistry. Rest became deliberate instead of accidental. Deep work became structured instead of hopeful. Reactivity decreased. Cognitive pacing became respected. The fictional drug introduced the lesson. Discipline absorbed the lesson. Forgiveness also arrived. Forgiveness for past underperformance. Forgiveness for mental fatigue is treated like moral failure. Forgiveness of believing a constant peak should be normal. The brain is biological. Biological reality deserves respect. KX wrote a closing sentence for the chapter. The fictional drug revealed territory. The fictional drug did not own territory. Enhancement is not identity. Clarity is not ego. Capacity is not superiority. Awareness holds all three without worship. The central question shifted again. The question stopped being, how far can KX go? The question became, how well can KX choose? Choice is power. Power without chaos is growth. The return to self. Eventually, the fictional drug faded into the background of daily life. The fictional drug was not demonized, and the fictional drug was not chased. The fictional drug simply stopped occupying attention. The absence of obsession became the milestone. A powerful tool loses narrative control when the mind stops orbiting the tool. For months, the process had been deliberate and heavy. Observation, interruption, reintroduction, measurement, restraint. Later, the inner argument disappeared. Moral debate quieted. Curiosity about performance quieted. Life became rhythm again. Work became work again. Pressure still arrived. Parallel submissions demanded precision. Redesign demands required layered thinking. Strategic shifts demanded timing and restraint. Earlier versions of KX would have defaulted to intensity as identity. The experimental phase might have defaulted to enhancement as convenience. The awakened phase chose something simpler: daily capacity assessment. Some days required extended endurance. Most days did not. Most days required structure, sleep protection, deep work windows, boundaries, and reduced distraction. The fictional drug showed frictionless cognition once. Discipline recreated most of the benefits through intentional living. The discovery changed everything because chemical leverage stopped being the only door. A quiet fear can appear after exposure to upper performance, fear falling below the high point. Sustained growth does not mean living at maximum. Sustained growth means lifting the natural state over time. KX lifted the natural state behaviorally. KX protected focus aggressively. KX reduced fragmented meetings. KX reduced reactive digital intake. KX removed unnecessary multitasking. KX stopped sabotaging natural cognition. Emotional maturity also sharpened. Slight dips in clarity stopped meaning a decline. Slight dips in clarity became fluctuations, normal, human, and temporary. The reframing removed pressure. Pressure exhausts more than a workload. A beautiful return also arrived: organic momentum. Earned focus produces quiet pride, not ego. Earned focus produces self-trust. KX recognized that self-trust again, refined and steadier than in earlier years. KX extended the gaps between usage naturally. Weeks passed without enhancement. The absence did not feel like deprivation. The absence did not create emptiness. The absence confirmed independence. KX looked back at the first silence from the beginning of the journey and recognized a new meaning. The first silence was not awakening. The first silence was evidence. The real awakening arrived later through choice, structure, and honest limits. Tools can accelerate outcomes. Character determines direction. Without changes in habits, any accelerator keeps a person fragile. KX changed habits: work arrangement, recovery timing, attention boundaries, and decision pacing. Enhancement became optional. Optional power is safe power because optional power cannot claim identity. KX wrote a sentence that felt final and heavy. KX is not enhanced. KX is aligned. Alignment does not require external assistance. Alignment requires awareness and discipline. The fictional drug expanded perception of capacity. The return to self was earned. Earned growth lasts. The discipline of restraint. During that month, KX stopped acting like a scientist and started acting like a ruler. KX stopped counting doses. KX stopped grading days as assisted versus natural. KX stopped running internal scoreboards that turned focus into a competition. The measuring phase had served a purpose, and the purpose had expired. Measurement can teach, but measurement can also poison. Measurement trains a mind to chase a number instead of guarding a line. KX needed a line. Restraint is not starvation. Restraint is not pretending desire does not exist. Restraint is the ability to hold an advantage in the palm and still keep the hand closed. Most people call that suppression because most people only know restraint as pain. KX learned restraint as authority. Authority requires adulthood. Authority requires the ability to deny a shortcut, even when the shortcut works. The fictional drug had already proven its usefulness. Usefulness never becomes permission for repetition. Results do not create entitlement. A tool that keeps winning can still take something invisible in exchange. The cause does not always arrive as a symptom. The cause can arrive as a shift in standards, a shift in identity, a shift in what feels acceptable inside the mind. That month delivered a clean test. A compressed bid cycle arrived with stacked demands and no breathing space. Technical architecture required coherence across moving requirements. Financial modeling required precision under time pressure. Executive narrative alignment required control persuasion without exaggeration. Compliance mapping required attention that could not drift. The window was aggressive, and the stakes punished mistakes without mercy. The old reflex inside, KX spoke early. The old reflex always speaks early. The old reflex offered the same pitch with polished language. Take the fictional drug, keep the head sharp, protect the schedule, protect the outcome. KX rejected the reflex. KX refused to treat difficulty as a reason for chemical support. Difficulty can be a furnace. A furnace burns weakness out of the structure when the structure is correct. KX chose baseline, not as martyrdom, but as training with intention. KX built the workload with a strict design. KX divided the day into defined focus blocks with fixed start points and fixed stop points. KX used 90 minutes for deep work and used 20 minutes for reset time, which actually resets the nervous system. KX locked devices away during focus blocks and removed easy exits from attention. KX treated concentration like contraband that needed protection in hostile territory. The work did not move more slowly. The work became heavier. Heavy work carries dignity because heavy work is carried, not borrowed. When the submission ended, I did not feel slick. Satisfaction felt dense. Dense satisfaction felt earned. And earned satisfaction strengthens a person in ways that clean speed never can. Refusing easy advantage changes the inner posture. Each refusal teaches the brain a hard truth. KX is sufficient without chemical leverage. That truth stabilizes identity. Chemical leverage is seductive precisely because chemical leverage performs. A shortcut that fails is easy to abandon. A shortcut that succeeds tries to rewrite the definition of normal. KX used a fictional drug once during that month. But KX used a fictional drug with clear intent and clear limits. KX reserved the fictional drug for a single synthesis session that demanded many hours of layered reasoning. The session required sustained integration across strategy, constraints, and risk. The fictional drug delivered the expected effect: steady clarity, clean continuity, and tighter execution. A difference appeared inside KX's reaction. KX felt no romance. KX felt no pride. KX felt no worship. KX treated the effect like a function, not a trophy. Emotional attachment is where tools become identity symbols. Identity symbols create repetition. Repetition creates routine. Routine creates ownership in the wrong direction. KX kept the fictional drug in the category of use, not self. Restraint also protected KX from another trap: other people's expectations. When performance stays elevated for too long, other people begin rewriting the baseline. Other people begin expecting the elevated version in every room, on every day, in every meeting. That expectation is dangerous because the expectation pressures consistency that no human physiology can maintain forever. KX limited enhancement to keep performance human and to keep fluctuation visible. Fluctuation is not failure. Fluctuation is the truth. Late in the month, KX recognized a deeper lesson. The fictional drug had reduced friction before, but friction is not the enemy. Poor handling of friction is the enemy. Fatigue signals exist for a reason. Slowness can be instruction. Discomfort can be information. A person who overrides every signal gains output and loses rhythm. Rhythm sustains a life. Output only fills a calendar. KX wrote a sentence that month because writing turns intention into law. Restraint shapes character faster than endurance expands capacity. Endurance impresses crowds. Character protects futures. By the end of the month, usage became rare without strain. The rarity was not a performance of discipline. The rarity was a consequence of control. When KX built a stable system, KX required fewer external corrections. The fictional drug stopped being a solution and became a reserved option for narrow conditions. The awakening matured again. The awakening stopped centering on capacity, and the awakening stopped centering on temptation. The awakening moved into final territory. Command over the self-image, command over ambition, command over the internal story. Peak clarity is not the highest state. Self-directed clarity is the highest state. The expansion. Work stopped being the reason. The professional life no longer demanded chemical reinforcement because the professional life no longer contained the same internal instability. KX had already built rhythm into deadlines. KX had already built discipline into long reviews. KX had already built pacing into the day without needing artificial lift. The fictional drug became unnecessary inside the work arena, not because misuse happened, but because the work arena stopped consuming the extra clarity. A sharper question replaced the old question. When clarity remains available and work no longer needs a clarity, where does clarity go next? What does clarity illuminate when clarity is not assigned to documents, meetings, and deliverables? KX chose an off day with no professional obligations and treated the day like a closed room. KX removed meetings from the schedule. KX removed incoming messages from reach. KX removed the usual distractions that pretend to be rest. KX used the fictional drug for introspection, not for productivity. KX wanted extended stillness with a mind that could not hide behind fatigue. The introspective experience did not resemble professional clarity. Professional clarity points outward and hunts for problems. Introspective clarity points inward and interrogates motives. Inward interrogation feels heavier because inward interrogation has no finish line. No contract exists to close. No proposal exists to submit. No external system exists to repair. The only subject is identity, and identity does not respond to deadlines. KX wrote for hours with deliberate precision. KX did not chase speed. KX chased honesty. KX wrote sentences that named patterns instead of describing outcomes. KX tracked the logic behind ambition and found a recurring theme. Ambition often behaved like debt repayment. Ambition often behaved like a constant attempt to prove distance from earlier mistakes. Ambition often behaved like a guard station at a door that no longer needed guarding. The fictional drug did not create those insights. The fictional drug made those insights harder to avoid. Sustained attention kept returning to the same unresolved motives, and sustained attention refused to accept distraction as mercy. A difficult truth surfaced during that writing. Much of KX's drive had been built as a response to earlier instability. The drive did not come from pure vision alone. The drive also came from an internal fear of repeating history. The fear did not speak loudly. The fear spoke as a background rule. Never relax too much. The rule looked responsible from the outside. The rule operated like a cage from the inside. That internal rule produced another pattern. Overwork is self-defense. A mind that fears regression often chooses excess effort as insurance. Excess effort looks respectable, so excess effort rarely gets challenged. Excess effort can also become another form of captivity, because excess effort keeps a person trapped in permanent vigilance. Endurance, in that context, stops being a tool for purpose and becomes a tool for fear. Fear-driven endurance can build a career and still quietly drain a life. Late in the day, KX felt emotionally exposed. The exposure did not resemble a breakdown. The exposure resembled skin removed from a bruise. The introspective state made emotional truth more direct, and emotional truth made self-deception harder. A person can outrun discomfort with tasks. A person cannot outrun discomfort inside a closed room with a focused mind. That day taught a severe lesson about the fictional drug. The fictional drug amplifies attention. Amplified attention follows direction. Amplified attention aimed outward strengthens execution. Amplified attention aimed inward strengthens confrontation with motive. Motive carries more weight than output because motive repeats itself long after achievements fade. KX wrote a line that stayed alive after the day ended. Undistracted clarity exposes motive. The ending did not produce performance pride. The ending produced a different confidence. Confidence built from self-recognition. Output can rise and fall. Reputation can shift. Energy can fluctuate. Honest knowledge of motive changes behavior at the root. The fictional drug helped unexpectedly. The fictional drug did not increase strength. The fictional drug reduced the ability to look away. Sometimes the most meaningful assistance is not an increase in power. Sometimes the most meaningful assistance is a removal of excuses that allow avoidance to survive. If KX wants a deeper cut, KX can choose one motive from the day: fear, debt repayment drive, or vigilance. And KX can ask for a version that builds a single continuous scene from morning to night with physical details and internal dialogue, without repeating any language from earlier chapters. The detachment. A certain kind of progress arrives without ceremony. Progress arrives when a previously important object loses gravity inside the mind. The fictional drug stopped feeling like a plot point. The fictional drug stopped feeling like a decision that required a speech in the head. The fictional drug stopped demanding attention. The fictional drug still existed, but the fictional drug no longer pulled focus. The absence of obsession carried more meaning than any productive week ever did. A long stretch passed with no use, not because a vow was made, and not because discipline needed a stage. The stretch happened because daily life stopped asking for chemical support. Work kept moving through structure and preparation. Clarity started coming from sleep and controlled schedules. Endurance started coming from pacing and breaks taken on purpose. Something inside the nervous system settled. The urge to push softened. The urge to prove quieted. When the engine stops being fueled, acceleration stops being compulsory. Detachment revealed a hard truth. The fictional drug was never the origin of strength. The fictional drug acted like an accelerator for patterns that already existed. Discipline existed before the fictional drug. Self-awareness existed before the fictional drug. Recovery work existed before the fictional drug. Systems thinking existed before the fictional drug. The fictional drug highlighted capacity, but the character stayed independent. One evening, an old notebook entry resurfaced. The notebook entry held a sentence written early in the experiment. "This does not make strength. This removes resistance." The sentence landed differently on a later reading. The sentence stopped feeling like discovery and started feeling like instruction. Resistance was never the true enemy. Unread resistance was the enemy. Friction that once felt like sabotage had been teaching pacing. Fatigue that once felt like failure had been marking a boundary. Internal bargaining that once felt humiliating had been forcing conscious choice. Temporary silence had been useful, but permanent understanding had been the real upgrade. Emotional range returned in full. Joy stopped feeling polished. Joy stopped feeling managed. Joy regained sharp edges, like life had depth again instead of smoothness. Satisfaction regained weight. Fatigue stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a signal. Humanity stopped being treated like a performance problem. Humanity became something to inhabit. The fictional drug became easier to categorize. The fictional drug stopped being tempting. The fictional drug stopped being risky. The fictional drug stopped being identity material. The fictional drug became a finished phase, something that belongs in memory, without demanding repetition. Detachment went deeper than chemistry. Detachment broke an older identity, the identity of a person who needs an edge. Edges were chased for years in different forms. Edges created tension, and tension created instability when tension stayed constant. The month felt centered, not elevated. Center felt sustainable, and sustainability outlasts brilliance. The journey carried an irony. The journey began with a search for sharper thinking. Sharper thinking forced self-examination. Self-examination produced restraint. Restraint produced a redesign of habits. Redesign made chemical support less relevant. The fictional drug sped up awareness, but awareness stayed after the tool became ordinary. A sentence landed clearly during that period. The strongest tool is a tool that can be left untouched without anxiety. Walking away does not reduce value. Walking away proves control. The arc approached completion, not through superhuman ability, but through human balance. Balance is rare. Balance is quiet. Balance is what keeps a life intact. The awakening, a full cycle passed, and the cycle exposed the shape of the journey. Time did not matter as a number. Time mattered as evidence. Evidence shows whether change survives pressure, comfort, praise, boredom, and fatigue. At the start, the experiment looked like a performance project. The experiment looked like focus, stamina, and cleaner execution. The deeper confrontation was identity. Identity decides what gets repeated. Identity decides what becomes habit. Identity decides what becomes worship. The fictional drug delivered real effects, and the effects were not imaginary. The fictional drug reduced the drag between intent and action. The fictional drug extended mental stamina without the usual midday decay. The fictional drug tightened thinking and reduced repetitive mental looping. The fictional drug made execution steadier and exposed and used capacity. The fictional drug forced restraint tests that a comfortable life rarely forces. The fictional drug exposed illusions about limits. The fictional drug intensified direction, meaning the fictional drug strengthened whatever the operator already aimed at. The fictional drug pushed recalibration, because a fictional drug made consequences clearer. The fictional drug expanded introspection when the fictional drug was pointed inward. The fictional drug clarified the motive by removing easy distractions. The fictional drug restored respect for the natural state by making comparison dangerous. The fictional drug taught detachment by proving that usefulness does not require dependence. None of those effects was the awakening. The awakening was the identity conclusion that survived every phase. The self is not defined by friction. The self is not defined by speed. The self is not defined by chemical clarity. The self is defined by choices. The fictional drug never deserved the hero role. A tool cannot be a hero because a tool has no ethics. A tool magnifies. A tool assists. A tool exposes. Outcome depends on the operator. Discipline prevented ego inflation. Recovery work prevented old, destructive patterns from returning in new clothing. Awareness prevented identity drift, where the assisted state becomes the only respected self. A rebuilt internal structure determined the outcome. The fictional drug did not build that structure. The most important shift arrived quietly. The chase for extremes stopped. The extremes were not only chemical. The extremes were psychological. Constant peak output. Redemption through overwork. Ambition used as proof of worth. Proof stopped being fuel. Trust replaced proof. Trust does not announce itself. Trust does not require witnesses. Trust holds steady in silence. Freedom changed definition. Freedom did not mean abstaining to look virtuous. Freedom did not mean indulging to feel powerful. Freedom meant the absence of fear when the tool stayed unused. Freedom meant knowing that the self would still function, still choose, still lead, still endure. A higher natural operating level emerged, not because chemistry permanently upgraded the mind, but because behavior was redesigned around the lessons. Focus was protected. Recovery was respected. Limits were honored. Ambition was balanced against sustainability. The tool revealed a possibility. Discipline built a system. Restraint protected agency. A final sentence carried the truth of the entire arc. Awakening is not becoming more. Awakening is becoming aligned with reality. Reality includes biology. Reality includes limits. Reality includes fatigue as information. Reality includes friction as feedback. A mature mind stops treating signals as enemies and starts treating signals as guidance. The end state was simple and strong. The ability to operate deep remained available. The ability to endure strategically remained available. The option to use enhancement remained available without attachment. The option to remain natural remained available without insecurity. That is awakening. Choice without fear, power without worship, clarity without ego.